I'm Shelby, and this is Filmish Chats. Welcome back to another episode of Filmish Chats. I'm Shelby Cook, head curator and editor-in-chief at Film East, and today I'm joined by my fellow team members Will Schofield, Ishnor, and for the very first time, Bella Madge, to discuss David Lynch's 2001 surrealist thriller, Mulholland Drive. This episode is part of Film East Online, a space for free online content in varying media to educate, inform, and inspire all things cinema. Film East is a multi-award-winning global film organization based in the east of England and the east coast of the US. Mulholland Drive's tagline famously classifies one of Lynch's most iconic films as a love story in the city of dreams. Betty, with her blonde bob and all-American girl aesthetic, has only just arrived in Hollywood to become a movie star when she meets a mysterious brunette with amnesia. As the two set off to solve the unknown woman's identity, filmmaker Adam runs into ominous trouble while casting his latest project. We couldn't believe that after 45 episodes of Filmish Chats, we haven't discussed a Lynch film. Well, in honor of the great director's passing, we decided that it's finally time to dedicate an episode to the filmmaker who brought dreaming to life and challenged the medium of visual storytelling. This is also an exciting episode because we're welcoming a new co-host to the podcast. We're happy to introduce Bella Madge, who joined Film East at the beginning of the year to help with the editorial side of the organization. Bella is an autistic freelance film critic and writer. She has a love for films that explore the human perspective. She's the assistant editor for Film East Online and will be joining us in future episodes of Film East Chats. Now, on to our discussion of Mulholland Drive. All right, in this episode, we are paying homage to our fallen king. Peace up to David Lynch. Did anyone else see the stuff that they put on auction from his private collection?
Yeah.
Some of the stuff in there is insane. Original scripts, original prints of movies. It's crazy.
His home cutlery, his
Yeah, his
electric
coffee maker.
drill. If you've ever wanted one of David Lynch's 8 sofas, now is your chance. He's so
Yeah.
many chairs.
I mean, some like his Christmas stocking was in there, and I was like, why would they give that away? That's awful.
Horrible. Oh gosh.
Okay, so I'm surprised actually now thinking about it. We've never done an episode on Lynch. I feel Lynch is so hard to talk about in just my personal perspective because I feel like he's so beyond what I can say. But we'll try. Um, so I think that leads well into the first question that I have. How would you describe a Lynch film? And do you enjoy Lynch's movies?
I I really do. I really like Twin Peaks. I love Fire Walk with Me. I
Mhm.
love Eraserhead. I love Elephant Man. Blue Velvet's pretty good. they're they're kind of ranged from there. I think that because we were discussing doing a David Lynch film,
Mhm.
and I think I was the one who said we should do Mulholland Drive
Yeah.
because I'd only seen it very recently for the first time. My local cinema has been doing kind of a Lynch month, and so I caught up on quite a few that I'd missed, like that and Lost Highway. And coming out of that one, it to me felt like the most Lynchian is the most Lynchy of his films. It in that it combines aspects across his whole
Uh-huh.
filmography, because when people say Lynchian, they talk about Lynch, they have a very specific thing in mind, which is general weirdness, general kind of surrealism and open-ended questions, which is a pretty important part of a lot of his works. But there's a lot more to it than that. I think the core component of a lot of his films to me is humanism and looking at a character who is in a particularly rough state and things kind of only get worse for them in usually both a physical and a metaphysical sense at the same time, and kind of often showing them a bit of pity um, through often there's some comedy, a lot of weird open-ended metaphors that aren't fully explained, a lot of spirituality, just kind of a mishmash of whatever Lynch is really into at that point in time. Um, but yeah, I think a lot of them aren't constructed to have particular, not quite meaning, but messages. They're not people. A lot of people think of them like they're meant to be solved,
Yeah.
and they're generally not. It's more about what you take away from it and the interpretation that you come to. They're kind of unfinished jigsaw puzzles in a lot of way, and that makes it sound like I'm like putting on a really high pedestal and lauding them. They're not. A lot of the time, they are not very kind of straightforward films. Um, but yeah, I really like them, and Mulholland Drive was no exception. It's probably one of my more liked on the upper end for me.
I will say I do enjoy Lynch's films. I enjoy not knowing what's going on. I enjoy the like just being attacked by what he's giving you, and you're just like, I know I'm not gonna understand what's happening here, so I'm just gonna watch it and I'm just gonna enjoy this experience. And that's how I felt watching Twin Peaks. I was like, I don't have a freaking clue, especially Twin Peaks: The Return. I was like, I don't have a
Oh
clue
God, yeah.
what is going on in this, but I'm really enjoying it. It's fun. I'm enjoying it, and I really respect. I think I'm not a big person who says, the director is the end all be all for how you interpret a movie, or I'm not a big auteur person. I don't really care about directors, but I think I really respect Lynch because he respects the craft, and he really respects, like, he was always about, I don't care if how I make a movie, how a movie gets made. I want it to be made, and I want it to be made in the way that I want it to be projected. Um, and I just think that Lynch, hopefully I don't get bitten the bum and it comes out that he was a bad person, but I just feel like he was a really, like, his whole life was just about making art, and he was so dedicated to making art, and he's just one of the good ones. And I really hope that doesn't come back and bite me later when it's revealed that he was really a bad person. But yeah, does anyone else have any thoughts on Lynch overall?
I I I like how in his movies there is no hand holding, like you have to get lost.
Yeah.
Like what Will said, that like you can't solve what's going on. And even what you said, that I enjoy, like whatever is happening, throw it at me.
Mhm.
I'm just gonna sit, relax, and it's sort of like an escape from, it's like for truly an escape from an ordinary everyday sort of life. So I think whatever both of you said, I agree. Because the moment you stop thinking the logic, you start enjoying. So yeah, that that's it.
And I think, like, with what makes Lynch such a unique director is that I think he very much could tell, he could make movies that were coherent and understandable. And I really
Hmm.
believe that he could do that. And you saw that with Twin Peaks. You know, with I know this when he was forced to, with the second season of Twin Peaks, to make it what ABC wanted it to be, for a mass population, when it really blew up and people were actually watching it and they wanted a coherent storyline, he could make that, but it wasn't good. And no one enjoys the second season of Twin Peaks for that reason, because it's coherent, it's narratively, in a line. What makes Lynch so exciting is that it is just bizarre. It's just like, what am I watching? This is so weird. And it is just like kind of experiencing art. Like, he is, to me, Lynch is the definition of how art and cinema can come together and blend and be this unique creation of creativity. So I know there's a lot of theories about what Mulholland Drive is about. There's an overarching, kind of accepted theory that it's a dream,
Hmm.
that it's Diane, uh, version. It's her dreaming what could have been through the lens of Betty and Rita. Um, I definitely agree with the dreaming aspect. I think there's so much emphasis on dreams and dreaming, particularly people mentioning dreaming. Um, the film opening with there's that opening shot in the beginning, which I will say I watched Mulholland Drive a long time ago. And of course, like every Lynch movie I watch, I'm like, I don't know what the fuck that was. I don't know what was going on. I was just like, okay, cool. So I moved on. I rewatched it this time. I was starting to put the pieces together. I was starting to pick up on things more because I actually knew the plot. I knew what was going on. But I rewatched the beginning again just because I kind of missed it when I was watching it the other night because I was doing other things. And there is very distinctly a shot in the opening of Diane's bed where she kills herself, the pink sheets, and it zooms in on her pillow. So I think it's very clearly that dreams is plays a part in this. Um, but I've also read some interpretations that it seems people think that it seems too obvious for this narrative to be what the film is about. So are your interpretations? Do you agree with the dreaming angle?
Well, I think it's very interesting you said that because you basically said what I already thought. I saw this film, like I say, about a month ago, shortly after watching Lost Highway, and that one is real weird. Um, that one was so much happening at once, and it felt like getting a concussion, you know. If Eraserhead is a nightmare, that one is a kind of falling asleep with a concussion, and it's just kind of stuff happening um and characters going in and out and disappearing and reappearing. And I remember on the drive home, sitting down and thinking, okay, so what was that about?
Mm.
And kind of coming to a conclusion in my mind as to what what I thought it was, what I thought was being said or whatnot, or my interpretation of it. And then I really enjoyed going online that night and looking at all the theories and looking at different people's interpretation of what things meant and whatnot and kind of piecing it together, and finding that my interpretation was very different to a lot of other people's. The same thing happened with Mulholland Drive, except when I got home and I had my ideas in my head and I looked online, everywhere I looked was just talking about this dream theory, was just talking about this very specific, this is what it means,
Yeah.
this is what happened in the film, and this is what this means. And it really bugged me,
Mhm.
both because I through my experience with Lynch's films, as you say, I don't necessarily think that is generally applicable. Like there are some like Dune and Elephant Man, which are just straightforward stories, but a lot of them, I don't think the point is that you're meant to figure them out. And on the other hand, it really ruined my experience of thinking about the film for myself because it was like when I read the Harry Potter books growing up, and then halfway through one of them, I went and saw the first movie, and suddenly I couldn't picture my Hagrid anymore. It
Yeah.
was just Robbie Coltrane that I was imagining, and it kind of felt like that. I really struggled to kind of think outside of that specific theory, and so I really kind of, I think I personally bristle against it, but at the same time, it's a pretty good theory, and it really does explain quite a lot about the narrative. So I'm kind of at a
Yeah.
bit of an impasse with it, really.
So
I think
I definitely think dreaming and dreams belong in it. I'm going to say this with the stipulation. I don't think Lynch's films are meant to be understood. I think, and he has said this, it's what you decide the film is about, is what the film is about. And I've always thought that about Lynch's films, is they're not meant to be understood. I do think dreams play a part in it, but I think how simple and straightforward that narrative is of um Diane is, having this dream about being a naive film star and she's going to start her career over again and she's going to win over Rita and all of these things. I think that's just too straightforward and too simplistic of a plot. The first
yeah.
time I saw it, I always saw Rita and Betty as mirrors, as like doubling. I always saw them as the same version of a one person. I don't know
Mm.
how you can interpret that, how you can go with it, but I always thought of them as being perhaps maybe the internal uh, ego of Diane. But I think that scene when Rita puts the wig on and she looks like Betty with that blonde bob, and the fact that they're looking in the mirror is very reminiscent of Bergman's persona. There's a lot of mirroring and doubling that's going on with them. So I always interpreted them as the same person, at least in that version of the story. Before we started recording today, I was actually watching a theory video, and the guy brought up all of these other characters, all these other women in the film that have blonde bobs. So the waitress at the diner has a blonde bob. Um, the prostitute, which has a very short scene, she has a blonde bob. And so he sort of was saying that, oh, and then the Camilla of the Betty and Rita narrative, she has a blonde bob. So these are all sort of, he was saying that they're all sort of different versions of this Betty Diane character because they all sort of, again, mimic how Diane looks with this blonde hair. Um, I'm also very intrigued by the Hollywood storyline. Um, Personally, when I was watching it this time, I was like, this is about the Illuminati, right? And I don't think I'm being like facetious for saying that. Like, I think that like it is about these people coming in and dictating how, and sure, I think, on a surface level, you could say it's the studios, and Lynch obviously does have animosity towards
Yeah.
the studios because of how they took over Twin Peaks and this film in particular. So Mulholland Drive was originally supposed to be a TV series like Twin Peaks. And it was commissioned by ABC. He made the pilot. A lot of the film is this pilot. And they ended up scrapping it because they didn't like the way that it was going. They didn't like where it was going. And then eventually he got money to finish it as a film. So you can
Mhm.
probably see a lot of those storylines of Lynch's animosity towards the studios and people telling him what he should do. But I also think there's something mysterious about these people that
Yeah.
is more deep than just these are the financiers of the film. Like, why are they the financiers? Why, like, so I don't know. Anyone else have any other thoughts?
I think
I
sorry.
Go
go
ahead,
no,
Bella.
sorry.
Thank you. I have to say this was actually my first Lynch film that I watched.
Congratulations.
Yay!
Her Lynch virginity.
Um, so yeah, I know, right? I think it was difficult for me. I think it's the autism, but I'm so used to the structure of things. So watching this was an experience for someone who's not really watched any of his films. But I have to say, I think similar to Will, going online after I watched the film, going on Reddit, and just being like, I don't know what the fuck I just watched, but I need to know what was going on because I could tell there was something deeper. I think looking things up was really interesting, and I think one of the things I was most intrigued by in the film was the beginning with the dream,
Yeah.
with the two men in the diner. I think that part I
Mm.
couldn't really stop thinking about it as I kept watching the film. And I think, as you said, Shelby, I think the Hollywood storyline is so prevalent because I think it's interesting that we see this sort of like decrepit, monstrous person right at the beginning, and then we also see them at the end. I think it really is a testament to um, how maybe on the surface these Hollywood films look, really, really glamorous and so well manufactured and without any flaws, and then sort of come the end, it reflects how anyone involved in Hollywood, this is the end result. It is rotted from the inside, and I think it's foreshadowed from the very beginning, and it's very difficult to draw that connection, I think, at the start because it's such a shocking scene and then doesn't really get referenced again till the very end. But I think it was very important in saying after we see sort of Betty and Rita's stories, and then similarly the Diane story afterwards. I think it was very interesting to be like, she got completely corrupted by her life in Hollywood, and then this was sort of the end result, and obviously with the box and the key at the end. I thought it all tied in very nicely to saying like Hollywood on the surface is one thing, but underneath it's completely different. I thought that was very interesting.
Mm. There's a shot at the beginning that I think about a lot where she gets off the plane after just arriving in Hollywood, and there's like an old man and woman there, and she's like chatting with them. It's clearly met them on the
Yeah.
plane, and they're all, "Ah, gee whiz, you're gonna do so good in the old on the silver screen, kid. We'll be rooting for you." And it's full of very kind of old kind of 50s American joy that Lynch is often does, kind of Wizard of Oz. And then the couple get into the car, and she goes off on her own. And then there's just this really long, weird shot of them sat in the back of the car, just grinning into nothing,
Yeah.
with like some
Yeah.
really creepy music playing.
Yeah.
And I think that like maybe that ties back into this idea of kind of the things bubbling under the surface. Maybe this nice, joyous, happy Hollywood. There's something wrong with it,
Yeah.
but
I
yeah.
I agree with you, because I think at the end, I think especially when Diane Betty is going to kill herself, those two figures are the ones that scurry under the door and sort of terrorize her.
Yeah.
They're laughing and they're like reaching out to her, and I think that's really interesting because they're the ones who sort of
Yeah.
usher her off into Hollywood, and they're like, "Oh, you're gonna do great," and then like it's so malicious from the very beginning, and the fact that they're sort of the last people that's sort of haunting her, I think again it speaks to this idea of like the people, even if they seem really lovely, who are ushering you off into this world are just as bad, which I thought was super interesting.
They also come out of the blue box too.
Yes,
Go
exactly.
ahead, Ishtar.
Oh. Yeah. No, I was like, I'm still on the first question of it being a dream or not. Like, I I agree that if we think of it as a dream, it's a very simplistic thing. But I do feel like if we just reverse the order of the dream, like what if the first half is not the dream, but the second half is the dream? And then there is like moral collapse or uh, tying into like what Hollywood actually does to a person. If we just look it from that angle, because I want to see it from that angle. I'm not like interpreting it or solving it, but I feel like Betty and Diana are like having this internal conflict. And then towards the end, uh, because of everything that is going on, bubbling under Hollywood, everything that is going on, that is how she deals with it. That is my theory, which I don't know if it means anything, but yeah, because I don't think so that the beginning part was the dream. I think the later part was the dream, with everything being so nice and everything happening so well. So I was like, that cannot be the dream.
I've
The
also
first
seen
part.
I've seen interpretations that the second half, the half with Diane, is a film. It's them making a movie of these characters.
Ah,
It's the movie version of, because it plays so much to the stereotypes of how Hollywood spits you out, and this big like how nasty Camilla is just very plays to these theories of like that's the movie version of the story type of thing. Um,
wow.
I do
So
think
many layers.
I know.
Mhm.
I think the whole film, to me, the film is about Hollywood. Um,
Yeah.
I think if
Yeah.
you get too focused on what the actual plot is, you're missing the point of what Lynch is trying to say about Hollywood. I think a lot of his later films, I'm also particularly referencing Inland Empire, because that movie is about making a movie. Um, there's a lot of commentary about Hollywood and the nastiness of Hollywood, but also there's so much reference to old Hollywood. You have a lot of old Hollywood movie stars in it. You have the reason why she's called Rita is from Rita Hayworth. Um, you have the Paramount studio. You have all of this old classic Hollywood things in there. But
Yeah.
it's also nasty and it's seedy and it's really getting to the underbelly of how corrupt Hollywood is. People have this idea of Hollywood being glamorous and beautiful and
Hmm.
picture perfect, but it's, people are behind the scenes telling you who to cast, telling you making creative decisions on your behalf just because they have money, and uh,
Yeah.
it's just a nasty,
Yeah.
nasty place.
I think there's more that ties
Yeah.
into that, especially with the club scene when they go, and then they're sort of announcing that everything you're hearing is pre-recorded, inauthentic.
Yeah.
And I think there's
Mm.
also yeah, I think I found that scene particularly interesting because I mean again I had no clue I had no clue what was going on. But when Betty and Rita are together while they're listening to the music, it's like Betty starts having like a little bit of a fit. And I remember coming up with a theory that maybe Rita's just because she's, concussed, whatever, she's come up with Betty in her mind or something like that. Because I think it's almost like her like reality is sort of flickering in that moment, like she's sort of fading away, which I thought was very interesting. I thought the club scene was probably my favorite part of the whole film, just because it drew you in so much. And then I think especially when the singer was singing Urando, I thought it was really beautiful. But then when she fell to the floor, I was like, oh yeah, no, this is sort of like, commenting on something that feels so real and emotive and then is completely snatched away. And I think again it does lead back to Hollywood. And I think whilst I did find this film, difficult on a first watch, I think the Hollywood, symbolism I think was really what drew me in, because there were so many moments that referred to it, being fake, inauthentic, and then completely, rotten at the core, which I think was very interesting.
I
Yeah.
really liked the club scene as well, and I think with the various interpretations we put forward about what parts are real, what part are not, what part of films, that feels like the kind of gateway between them very much. And that's the point at which whatever
Mm.
happens changes over. And I think a detail I didn't notice while watching, but read online later and said that can't be true, and watched it back and went, oh my God, is that Laura Palmer's there? Like
What?
Cheryl Lee, the actress who plays Laura Palmer, is there in costume as Laura Palmer in the audience of that
Wow.
room. And so not only is it like
Oh my
a
God.
border between the real and fake, it's a border between almost his works as well.
See, this is
Um,
what I was talking about in the beginning. I love these threads that connect throughout Lynch's works. And I just like
Yeah.
that is why I'm like so intrigued, because he reuses these motifs and these characters and these tropes over and over again that, I think a lot of people would be like, this is getting stale, but it's just like, why is he doing this? Like, what is like his brain, like I want to be inside of it. I want to know how his brain works. It's so cool.
Um,
Um,
yeah.
I really liked what you said, Bella, about when Betty starts shaking, it could be her disappearing. And that just like clicked something in me. What if we're projecting Betty slash Diane as being the protagonist, but it's actually Rita slash
Yeah,
Camille who's the protagonist, because she is the first one that we
yeah.
see open on her, like the story opens on her in the
Yeah.
limo.
I mean, when Rita opens the box for the first time, like Betty
Betty's
disappears.
gone. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was like
Yeah.
a very viable thing to believe. I mean, there's so many things that counter that at the same time, which I think is probably the brilliance of his work, because there's so many ideas. But I think that when that club scene happened and then the box happened, I was like, oh, there's a real possibility here that she's just maybe vented or projected some part of her onto Betty or Diane's character, and then that just grows throughout the film, which I thought was, yeah, super interesting.
Or we could even perhaps
Yeah.
see,
And
well, we could even perhaps see Diane in this fantasy, in this, dream of hers. Maybe she's playing Rita.
Yeah,
Maybe she's not playing Betty.
yeah,
Because there is this sort of idea of them all being the same person. Um,
yeah.
and what always bugged me was Rita's the one with the key. And the key was supposed to
Mm.
symbolize when the job is done, you'll find the blue key. And Diane's the one that has the blue key because she's the one that ordered the hit. But
yeah.
Rita's the one that has the blue key in her purse. So why would Rita have it if it was supposed to be?
I think, yeah, I think there's also that very real possibility of like in her, maybe Betty and Rita are the same person because she's just that's who she wants to be. I think is
Mhm.
also a very interesting
Yeah.
thing. I think going back to what you said earlier, Shelby, about like the doubling and the mirroring, I thought there was a really interesting part that I remember. I think it's the first time they're sleeping together, and
Mhm.
Betty says like "I love you" over and over again, but she's the only one who says it. And
Mm.
again, I think it
Says
feeds
that.
that
Yeah.
idea of like maybe she's projecting like her ego onto like the character of Rita, like who she wants to be or maybe who she is sort of contained within Rita. And I think her just repeatedly saying that I really touched on. I was like, maybe it is just, it could have gone either way. Maybe Betty invented Rita, Rita invented Betty. But I thought that scene was also super telling of yeah, the doubling.
Yeah. I I also feel like Rita is driving the narrative most of the time. Like she is the one that we meet for the first time, and then she tells Betty that we have to go there. Betty leaves her audition. Whatever is happening so that Rita can figure out what's happened.
Yeah.
So I think that Rita's agency and how Rita is driving the narrative also talks about maybe they are the same people, but different versions of the same people. Yeah.
Yeah.
The more I'm thinking about it, the more confused I'm getting with a lot
Uh-huh.
of things. But but yeah, like also like how you have to be Rita to get the part. And it talks about the casting, control, and like power dynamics and violence that Lynch has tried to show or has shown. I mean,
Mm.
has shown. So it also ties into the fact of like same people, different personalities, and one personality gets the success and everything that she wants, and the other person has a breakdown. So
And I
just
think that,
showing you the picture of, yeah,
yeah, now that you're saying that, Ishnar, I think that could even be a commentary on the role of actors or celebrities in society. Because if you think of
yeah,
someone like Taylor Swift, obviously her persona of how she projects herself to the world is the Camille, right? She's a big, powerful, beautiful woman, and she's in control, she's in charge. But you never know what's happening behind closed doors. And there's a lot of this, you know, I don't want to be on the Swifty conspiracy theories, but somehow I keep ending up there on my TikTok and I hate it. And but there's this idea of, especially with if you look at her songwriting, there's an idea of behind closed doors, she's very depressed. She's very isolated from the world. She feels, unlovable, all of this other stuff. So that's this sort of two different versions of the same person. What she's putting out, when you think about her on the Eras Tour stage, she's
yeah,
large and in control of the world. But when she's at home, she's Diane. She feels like her world's ending, her world's collapsing, and sort of this duality of one
yeah,
person, but how you have to manage that when you're a celebrity and you're a star, how the public sees you versus how you actually are, type of thing. Or even this identity of not necessarily Taylor Swift could live a perfectly normal life, It's just like she's projecting this identity of who she is, of what she wants people to see of her. So it's that same sort of, because I've always found that very fascinating of how the different identities of actors and how actors, I mean, the whole thing could just be about actors, now that I'm saying that, like
yeah,
the different characters you play as an
yeah,
actor.
Yeah.
yeah. Oh my God, my brain.
Literally.
So
Ah,
what are your thoughts on the portrayal of sex and sexuality in the film? Is it voyeuristic? Is it sort of fetishy? Uh,
I
I
read a
I will say, well, I'll kick it off. I found it a little weird. It was very in your face. Their boobs were like in your face, and you're like, oh my God. Like, I was like, whoa. Um, and there's a part of me that was like, okay, if you think about the time when it was made, this sort of portrayal of lesbian sexuality or bisexuality was very unique on screen. This wasn't something that was seen a lot in what, Mulholland Drive became quite a pretty famous film.
yeah,
Um, so in that respect, I think it was pretty groundbreaking for what it was portraying. But it
Yeah.
was also a man shooting women. Is that objectifying? Is that just the nature of the time that it was made?
I read a critical review and it was sort of analysis slash breakdown of the lesbian relationship between the two of them, and it was an interesting read because I don't think they were massively on board with the portrayal. I wonder what you guys think about this, but they felt that Lynch was implementing very like stereotypical stock character tropes in their relationship. So like Betty was very innocent, very, I think they used the term schoolgirl. I think just very, very innocent, whereas Rita was very much like the femme fatale, and that is sort of very relied upon stereotypes or tropes. Because I think when I watched it, I think the only reason why I knew there was a sex scene in it was because of that one Chapel Roan song that references that references the film. So I was like, okay, I know I'm in for that. But yeah, I think it was interesting. I think they had some sort of tension between the two of them that progressed, but I wouldn't necessarily have believed that it would have led to them having sex in the way that it did happen. I think part of it probably was leaning a hand to some of the symbolism we've discussed, but I think when I read that critical analysis, I definitely was intrigued by, yeah, what they were putting forward for sure.
I would be inclined, as you mentioned, to make the case for that being sort of intentional in the sense that, I mean, if we look at the most popular theory that the majority of the movie is Diane's dream, um, then that portrayal of herself as a innocent, kind-hearted, young upstart who suddenly meets this mysterious femme fatale character who kind of comes into a house, and they immediately bond and become close, and then they have this intense relationship that's somewhat voyeuristic but entirely pure and hot and all this other stuff. It's very much it does feel fetishy, and it does feel like a constructed unrealistic scenario built on stereotypes, but in that sense it makes sense that that is how Diane would imagine that relationship. Whereas when we see her again later on, there's the scene where she kind of starts masturbating, and I felt that one was portrayed a lot less fetishistically, a lot more kind of
grounded in real,
just a woman really going at it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that dichotomy was almost purposeful. That's not to say that the entire kind of concept of lesbian sex being shot in that way or portrayed that way isn't part of a wider Hollywood issue. And it's not really for me to say that Lynch was doing a kind of triple whammy reverse. I'm doing it for the good reason, guys. I'm aware that what I'm doing is voyeuristic, but that makes it non-voyeuristic. I can't speak for him, but yeah, I think I'm willing to be a bit more forgiving on it. So as the straight white cis guy of the group, he gets a pass on that one.
That's why we keep you around. You're
exactly
a white cis man.
I genuinely forgot that I used to have a boyfriend. I genuinely forgot that a minute
there. Yeah, Ishmael, do you have anything to say about that?
I mean, I do agree with Will and Bella, but I also feel like it could see. I'm still there with like, who's Diane, who's Betty, who's Rita, who are these people? But I was, but I'm like what Will said, that how who is it? How Betty sees this relationship with like kind-hearted naivety, like wants to love, but also gives into the objectifying gaze of the industry, and the industry doesn't want love but wants sex.
Yeah.
So it could just also be a bigger commentary on what works in Hollywood, or what works in the when it comes to the film and the TV world.
Yeah.
That's a good point too.
Yeah.
I want to bring up the audition scene too.
That was a weird watch for the first time.
Yeah.
I think there is, again, about this commentary on how Hollywood functions. If you watch, Diane or Betty is very objectified. The guy, her friend who knows her aunt who gets her into this audition. He is rubbing his hand up and down her back, and it's like
Yeah.
disgusting. And it's
Yeah.
just like, you know, that's what goes on in audition rooms. Everyone's staring at you, everyone's looking at your body, everyone's looking at, are you going to look good on the screen? How skinny are you? Take your shirt off, let's see your tits, let's see if they're going to look well on the screen, whatever. Um, but I think what's really interesting about that scene is that Betty gives into what people expect from her. She gives
Yeah.
into that sexuality. She gives into it's, I don't think she gives into it. She plays into it. She knows that this is what they want from
Yeah.
her. She knows
Yeah.
that her scene partner is a creepy, gross old man who's gonna hit on her no matter what. So she gives into that, and she is super sexual, and she plays sort of the femme fatale. She plays Rita very much in that scene. Um, and I think if we think about Diane being the antithesis of Betty, right? Betty in this fantasy world is going to succeed. She's going to make it and become a star. Diane doesn't make it. I think when I was thinking about it, what I sort of thought of, if this is Diane's fantasy, does she in her fantasy world go back to that audition and change the way that she played that? She played into the sexuality that they wanted from her, that
Yeah.
would get her the part, versus maybe Diane didn't do that. Maybe Diane had respect for herself and didn't want to put her body out there, didn't want to feed into that because she felt uncomfortable. Um, that's
I
what she would
think,
want to change.
yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it because it gives the impression that Diane, looking back, thinks, "Oh, I failed because both because I didn't play into it enough and because that's what they wanted of me is this intense
Mm.
sexuality." And so it creates a really weird balance of both the men all being gross,
Mm.
weird perverts, but also her totally playing into it, totally knowing exactly how to handle it, how to control them, and act this femme fatale way, which is very contradictory to the Betty we've kind of known up to this point. And
Yeah.
so it
Yeah.
almost doesn't quite slot together this idea that they're all gross perverts, but also she's totally chill with that, and she's kind of aware of how gross and weird it is, but also is totally fine and is totally great at it and impresses them all and even makes them a little bit uncomfortable at times, despite everything we know. It doesn't quite, and then nails audition and then walks out and gets an invitation from an even better agent who is a woman and actually
And just,
respects her this time.
yeah,
It's this weird fantasy where like everything on top of one another doesn't quite make total sense and it's
Yeah.
quite unrealistic.
yeah.
Um, and I think, yeah, as Shelby was saying, if we look into it from that perspective of it's Diane's dream, then it kind of fits a lot more. But I think on a more basic level, it probably is just, again, as you say, a more straightforward repudiation of the Hollywood system in the same way,
Yeah.
in very much the same way as Justin Theroux's meeting with the studio executives,
Yeah.
where they come in and say, "No, you're going to do this. You're going to have Camille as your star of the film," and I won't say no. This is kind of the same from the actor's perspective.
Same way.
These
Yeah.
weird systems that are a bit outside of their ken, kind of Kafkaesque, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I said earlier about how this was originally filmed as a pilot for a TV show that was scrapped. He ended up finishing the film by putting my the way that I have interpreted it is the Betty Rita story was the original pilot, and then he added on the Diane part. That's my interpretation. I don't know if that's actually true. Apparently, you can watch the pilot online somewhere, the original Mulholland Drive pilot. Um, do you think, because there are so many loose threads that come into this, like the crash, you see that scene of the police investigating the crash, and then nothing comes of that, and then you see the scene of the diner that nothing comes of those characters. Those characters kind of disappear. There's a lot of things that seem like they would be there. They were setups for what would come later down in the series.
Hmm.
Do you think those loose threads ultimately suffer because Lynch was unwilling to change the film? And I, have heard people say that he was unwilling to change it. Do you think it makes the story suffer and it makes it more inherently confusing? Like, was it necessary to have that diner scene with those two people that lead to that scary figure in the alleyway? It does set up the idea of dreaming. So it does bring in that sort of narrative there. But and also like the lady who is like the log woman version of Mulholland Drive. She like comes to the door and she's like, there's something wicked in there. She's like, you're not who you say you are. And it's like she's like the log woman of, whatever. So it's like, were some of those things necessary to include? Do you think it makes the film unnecessarily confusing, or does it just add to Lynch's surrealism?
I think it's
One, oh,
both,
sorry, Hugo.
I'd say. Like I don't know. I think, but part of me is torn because at the beginning, when the bit with the two men in the diner happened, I was like, I couldn't stop thinking about it because I was like, oh, I wonder when that's going to come back up,
Yeah.
and then obviously it doesn't. I think part of it is like you could kind of tell it was going to be a TV show from how they set parts of that up. I think because there are so many threads at the beginning that don't get picked back up, but then also like you say, I think it adds to the surrealism because as I'm learning and as we've spoken about, when you watch one of his films, you can't hold on to any sort of scene for a sense of logic or reason because they're quickly dashed, forgotten about, moved on to another very weird sequence. So I think in part I liked it because it kept things in your mind so you could theorize. But at the same time it did almost feel like loose ends. But I think me personally, I would say that I think it bled more into the surrealism of the film, so I think it did work, I'd say.
Yeah,
I
similar for me as well. Go
so I was
go
just gonna
ahead,
say,
Will.
oh, thanks.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say I loved. I don't think so personally, and I loved the scene with the cowboy
Mm.
where Justin Theroux is sent off to meet this weird cowboy guy in the middle of a ranch, and he
What
says a
about
bunch of weird. He says a bunch of weird nonsense like they
Yeah.
always do. But then he says, if you do good, if you do your job, you'll see me once more, and if you don't, you'll see me twice more.
Yeah.
And then later, towards the very end of the film, at the dinner party where Betty's kind of in the quote unquote real world and she's crying, we see the cowboy walk past in the background, and that's the one time because they did their job. They followed. Camilla got hired. They gave in, and that question of what would happen if we said no, it felt like that was where the whole storyline with the producers and the little man in the red room and all these other things were kind of building to Justin Theroux's ultimate refusal and the consequences of that and the fallout from that. But
Yeah.
then it doesn't happen. And I think that kind of sense of loss and almost regret for the viewer, the tantalizing uh, what could have been kind
Mm.
of plays in because at the end of the day, that's very much what the film is kind of about, the feeling of regret and what could have been um and and loss in that sense, the grief of that. And I think that I found that really effective as a viewer. We're never going to find out where those things were going. Justice, Diane is never going to know what life could have been like if she hadn't chosen to hire that hitman. And that the hitman plot was one that I did think, okay, that felt like there was more originally written
Yeah.
because he has that whole great slapstick sequence, and then we
Oh
see him a
yeah.
little bit later where he's like, "We're gonna find her," and then he just never never comes back again.
That
Um,
the line
yeah.
reading of that woman in the other room, she's like, "Oh, I got bit real bad." Oh my God, that freaking killed me. I was laughing so hard. I was like, "What?" Like she's like, "I got bit real bad." And she was like so over the top and dramatic with it. It was just so funny. It's like that was definitely like
Yeah.
Lynch was sitting in his director chair and like, "Yes, great, I loved it." That was just such a Lynchian, like so weird. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Um, but the
Yeah.
cowboy,
Oh,
so I just want to talk about the cowboy real quick.
okay.
Video essay that I watched before we started recording this, the guy did mention that the cowboy actually comes back twice. So
Yeah.
Really?
He comes back
When?
the first time when we see him, this like, well, I guess it would be the second time that we see him. He is in Betty's or Diane's bedroom before he wakes her up into
Yeah.
the quote unquote real world.
Ah,
And then we see him again walking in the background of that, the engagement scene. The guy, the video essay that I was watching was insinuating that because this is all Diane's dream, of course, everything is coming from her psyche, that the cowboy, he's spewing all this stuff about your attitude. How do you, the way that you act is how what determines your outcome in life. And you have a
Yeah.
bad attitude, so bad things are going to happen to you. Um, is sort of like her psyche telling her that she did bad because she didn't change her attitude. She didn't change the way that she was perceiving the world. She just felt like everyone was out to get her because she failed at being an actress. She lost her girlfriend. She's just a big bump on a log. She's a total loser and she didn't change her attitude. And so she ultimately failed at the mission that he was giving her, and then she saw him. Well, I guess she didn't doesn't see him twice,
But he's
but
in the background sort of walking past,
yeah,
as I remember.
but we see him. So I don't. Yeah, so that was because I had forgotten that he was in the bedroom again until because I distinctly remember seeing him in the background of the engagement scene
Yeah.
until I watched that video essay again. I was like, oh my God, he was there. You're right. So I
Yeah,
don't know what that means, but
I think that was like a big way for people to back up that it was all a dream because he was waking. I mean, I know it was at the same place that they find the body at the beginning, but it's
yeah.
like it is maybe that way of saying like, oh yeah, maybe it is her dream and it has gone, completely wrong because she was trying to put the hitman out. Which I thought was really interesting. I'm a big fan of when films do sort of like the characters of films start to feel like the consciousness of the main character, and that definitely started to
yeah,
feel like that as it progressed for sure.
Ishnu,
yeah.
you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that I don't think so that there was any scene that was unnecessary for me. Like for me, because I'm watching it and I mean, you remember we all did the recording of Patterson where we were trying to make sense of things. So when
Mm.
I'm watching Lynch, I'm like, I'm not making sense of what comes back and what happens. So for me, it did add to the surrealism that Lynch has in his movies. And I also agree with Bella's point of how the characters are shown more, how the consciousness of the characters are shown more explicitly than what the characters are doing. Yeah.
So what's our final conclusion? Do we have an answer to this film?
No.
No.
But
We
that's the good thing about it,
yeah.
definitely.
We have the answer that we think Lynch is really cool and we're gonna RIP miss him.
Yep.
I honestly, when
Yeah.
that news broke, I gasped. I was like, I was so sad. I was like, I can't even believe it. Like it was just so it was like when David Bowie died. Like I just felt like everyone in the world was just like, what? Because it was
Yeah.
just like it was so sad.
Who's the
Yeah.
next David?
I know, yeah. And that is such, honestly, the fact that those two didn't work together more,
Hmm.
biggest,
Yeah.
worst thing that's ever happened in the world. I think those two should have made the most insane alien
Yeah.
movie. Oh my God, it would have been so good.
Do you know, apparently David Lynch was one of the first people to know that David Bowie was dying because he invited him to
I
come
believe
back
that.
for Twin Peaks: The Return.
Yeah.
And so David Bowie was like, sorry, man, can't.
Well, in that video essay I was watching, the reason they were saying the Joe, the hitman, has the two different color eyes, and they were saying that's sort of a reference to David Bowie and his two different eyes. I don't know if I necessarily believe that. I think that he also said the duality of is it real or fantasy, the dreams versus reality could have also been the reason why he had two different color eyes, which I would buy that one more than I would buy that it's about David Bowie.
Yeah.
Um,
We should do more Lynch.
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to, I've seen a lot of his films, but I've seen them so long ago that it's been a while since, like, I don't necessarily remember them. Twin Peaks is coming on Moonbee, and they're making a huge deal. That Moonbee's making a huge deal, and they got Twin Peaks. So I'm gonna rewatch it when it comes on Moonbee. But they also changed the name of the third part. I don't know what they changed it to, but it's not called Twin Peaks: The Return anymore. So
Oh.
I don't know what's going on with that, but
Weird.
I really do want to rewatch the third part because I remember watching it the first time and I was like, I don't have an absolute clue what's going on. I was just so amused by Kyle MacLachlan's like the weird doppelganger version of
I love
the
it.
cop. I was just like, I don't know. He's like a sim. That's what he was like. Yeah, and I've always believed in that theory that he was just a sim. Like what is he doing?
I would love to do a film east on Firewalk with me, but then we'd all have to rewatch 30-hour-long episodes in order to reach that point first.
I think you
Which
could
is
just watch the first season of Twin Peaks and understand Fire. I think I watched it. I think I watched Fire Walk with Me before I watched the second season.
probably the last episode of the second season as well, I'd
Is
say.
that
That
when they
one's a
show you what happens in the last episode? I don't
yeah, kinda. It's Lynch, so it kind of makes sense and it kind of doesn't make sense, and it all kind of fits together and it also doesn't. It's that's how he was.
Yep.
I go.
Oh,
Bless up. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Film East Chats. To learn more about Film East and our film criticism publications, upcoming events, and unique activities, visit our website, film-east.com, or follow us on any of our social media, at films_east. Make sure you're subscribed to Film East Chats anywhere you listen to podcasts, including Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube, so you never miss one of our deep dives into films and TV. Again, we're Film East, a global film organization. Catch you next time.